حبيبه حافظ سره ومبلغ رسالاته حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد صلى الله عليه وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المكرمين سيما بقية الله في السماوات والأراضين. قال الله تبارك وتعالى في القرآن الكريم: ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما. صدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على محمد. One day, someone in front of Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam, he made a comment about having children. He said that what a bad thing is to have a child. As long as you're alive, they are causing discomfort. You have to be worried about them. And once you're not in this dunya, all they do is just eat your inheritance and whatever you made for them. And we see similar comments about people who their perspective about life, it's kind of a half-empty type of a guy, a pessimistic approach. And beautifully, Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam told him, Imam said, instead of saying what you said about a child and children, say what a great blessing and gift of God is to have a child. As long as you're alive, he or she could be an assistant, helping you, supporting you, be a reason of your honor. And once you're not in this dunya, they can pray for you and ask Allah for maghfirat and forgiveness for you. It's up to us how we look at things. There are a lot of studies actually about our perspective and how even our pessimism or optimism, it affects the mapping of our brain. There are a lot of brain scans that actually shows that optimism, of course we're not talking about unrealistic optimism, it's positively helping us to think better, to function better, and ultimately help us in our decision-making process. And the reason I start with this is last week as we had the discussion, one of the, I would say, long-lasting concern of every parent is the concept of tarbiyat, an upbringing of children. And the more we know about it, at the same time we know that we have a heavy responsibility. It's very important. But also know that it's not that easy to do the process of tarbiyah. We have to know this very, very clearly. It's interesting that when we look at a lot of outcomes of social studies, so that could be studies on child development or about adolescent psychology, a lot of studies, the outcome and the result of those studies are telling us what we already knew. Is they're not discovering new things, in most cases. For example, one of those studies, which it talks about how we can help people to face difficulties, anxiety, depression better. It's a lecture I talked about in Farsi Thursday. The result of that study is that one of the reasons because people, they don't invest enough time and energy into their relationships. And instead of working on their family relationship, their relationship with their parents, with their spouse, with their children, they try to look for an alternative. I try to make more money. Maybe that makes me more peaceful. If I have a good retirement account, maybe then I will feel at ease. If I have enough money for my child to go to college, then I will be at peace. But the study showed that one of the biggest reasons we don't feel content and satisfied and pleased is because we feel alone. 39% of people, according to one survey, which again, you can argue that surveys are not accurate, but this is something I personally notice as well, aside from that survey, is that when they're being asked about how close you are to someone, or is there anyone that you feel close to? In America, 39% of people said no. I don't feel that I'm close to anyone. And we can see that, I can see that among young people. They feel that they are not noticed, they're not being appreciated, they're not loved, and they're alone. And that's why we go out of our way. This hour is referring to social media presence. We want to be out there in order to get that missing piece of the puzzle. I want to be loved, I want to be noticed, I want to be cherished. So when the answer is that, okay, so what's the solution? The solution is good relationship, healthy relationship. That helps you to be happy. That helps you to live healthier. You may say, we knew that all along. You know, probably if you look at storybooks or folk tales, they will tell you from hundreds of years ago, family, relationship, right? It's all about your spouse, half of your deen. We knew all this all along. Why is it that we need this? We knew all this, but still somehow we ignore it. Why is that? That's a question we ask ourselves, right? Why? If it's so obvious, why we don't do anything about it? And the answer is simple. The answer is because relationships, because family, because our interaction with people is not straightforward. It's complicated. It's messy. If you have a pet, right, which a lot of people think that's a way of a new member of the family, that's in this culture considered to be a new member of the family, a pet. When you do something to this pet, usually there's a reaction. It's expected, it's pretty much straightforward. You feed them, you pet them, you take them for a walk, and that's it. You don't see suddenly they decide to leave you. As long as they're food and you take care of them, there's that loyalty. But with people, that's not the case. With people, you can do all the right things and maybe still they decide to abandon. There's a possibility. Maybe a very low possibility, but there's a chance. هل جزاء الإحسان إلا الإحسان? That's an obvious statement. Is the compensation of good is anything but good? Of course it's obvious, but the reality is all the prophets of God came and all they did was ihsan. All they did was they did good. But did all of them receive ihsan in return? Yusuf alayhi salam, what did he do wrong to his brothers that he got what he got? Musa alayhi salam, he saved Bani Israel and what he got in return. And the list goes on. To Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, all he did was try to help. Not just only trying, he did help. And in return, how his family was treated, how his daughter was treated, how Muslims after him, they went against one another and going against one of the, let's call them the primary figures of Islam, Ali ibn Abi Talib. If you don't accept him as an imam, as a Muslim, but we accept him as one of the prominent figures, what happened? So we see that relationship is not straightforward. People, they have that complication. And the same thing is about tarbiyah. It's about tarbiyah. One thing we have to, before starting the topic of upbringing, raising children, it's important to know that it's not easy, but it's not impossible. It's not necessarily the direction is one way. The goal is the same goal, but our approach has to be flexible to our tarbiyah. And if we think there's the only way that I can raise a good child is this way. And if there is a moment of fluctuation, ups and down, then I cannot do anything about it. I did not get it right. The tarbiyah requires patience, and also it requires to know that it is okay to learn from mistakes, and it's okay to do your best to raise a good child. So it's not going to be clean. That's a very important point to start with. That's why we have a first child syndrome, second child syndrome. The way you raise your first child is a bit different from the second child and the third child. It's because of that. Simple. When you are experiencing something in hand, in person, is very different from theory. It's very different. That could be, you learn. I give an example. I learned about the rules and the rituals of Mayyit, the deceased. About the ghusl, about the burial, all that, we learned that in fiqh, jurisprudence. But once you are in the position, is a different story. You know all the theories and now how to do it, that's a different story. Same thing is about, you learn, we read books, we listen to lectures about raising children, but once you're in the position, you have to be ready to understand that not everything is going to be according to the book. The principles are the same principles, but the incident and the problems you're facing may be different. So now that we know this, let's start inshallah with the concept of tarbiyah. The first important, again, I'm going to make points because in order to quantify it and it's easier to recall, to remember. I don't want it to be abstract and I say a bunch of points and then at the end if I ask you what did I talk about, you say I don't know, you said so many things. So let's give it numbers. So point number one that I just mentioned, it's about how to look at children overall. Don't look at them as evil creatures, or don't look at them as someone who's tried to get you. Don't look at them. They are, as the tradition of Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam, they're blessings, they're gift from Allah. That's number one. If you look at them that way, it would be different. Rather than we going to the way that some, let's call Freudian psychologists, they look at children and how they are a competition with their parent. Let's put all that aside. From the Islamic perspective, your child is a blessing. He's not the stronger replacement of you and all, none of that. We don't look at it that way. So if you look at the kings, and it doesn't matter, Eastern, Western, you'll see one of the reasons a lot of these kingdoms, they fell apart, they were toppled, was because the king and usually the monarch, the one in power, would not train their children well because they didn't want them to become strong, that they considered overthrowing them. So somehow isolating them, somehow don't let them get their hand on the power and how to rule, was the reason that as long as they were alive, they would rule, and as soon as there was the successorship and then who's going to come after, it will fall apart. They didn't have the experience, they didn't know how to do it. And that was the true about it, the Eastern kings as well as Western ones. So for us, our perspective number one is the child is a blessing. And daughters and sons, boys and girls, and from the Islamic perspective, they're both blessings of God, but daughters have a higher advantage in Islam. This is what Islam says. If you call it discrimination, if you call it, lack of inequality, the scale in the eyes of Islam is that the girls are blessing, that you will be compensated and rewarded more for them. So that's also in the tradition. But ultimately what we see in our culture is not saying that. Our culture, unfortunately, this culture is referring to, specifically Middle East, right? Most of them, unfortunately, still, even in 21st century, there is this preference of having boys over girls. In some families, not everyone, of course. So that's point number one. How we look at children, that's number one. Number two, know that raising children is not going to be straightforward. It requires your adaptability as well as knowing that in our approach we have to be flexible. We don't change the goal, but in our approach we change. So in old time they used to, make the child sit down and do something. Right now they do it differently. Right? iPad is not evil. Right? It's not evil. You can use it in a good way. Technology is not evil. You can use it in a good way. For raising children, something you need to learn that. We cannot shut it down forever. How to do it, that's our responsibility. Yes, there are some time for a child that the screen time overall is not good, but that's something we have to learn. It's not straightforward, but it's not impossible. It is a bit complicated, but it is doable. That's point number two. So once you enter to the field of, this struggle of raising children, you know that it's not going to be 1 + 1 = 2. It's not that simple. It's more than that. And now let's go to the third one. The third point that inshallah we learn about tarbiyah. These are, let's call the introduction to tarbiyah. Introduction to upbringing and raising children. The third introductory point, which is very important to keep in mind, is that in order to raise a good child, we have to know that we cannot raise a child just in one dimension or one aspect of their lives. We need to have they call the multi-dimensional, or let's call them a pronged approach. That you are raising this child in different dimensions. So what are those dimensions? One of them that we all know about, which is the physical upbringing of your child. You make sure that your child physically is well. So we have to spend time on that approach, right? From their diet, what they're eating, to just, baby-proofing your house when you have a child, to kind of protect them against physical danger in your environment. So we cannot ignore their physical well-being. So we see, look at the Prophet as an example. Our Prophet ﷺ was very caring, specifically with the physical well-being of a child. Physical well-being of a child. So that's why if a child will fall, Prophet would rush toward them, help them stand up, making sure that they're fine. Even if that child is the same child who threw a rock at Prophet. So physical well-being of a child is important. We cannot ignore it. This is unfortunate that sometimes, again, we replace God when we are, God forbid, try to be careless or lazy. Example is, you go and you see a child is walking, hardly walking, right? And then they're going towards something dangerous, like they're going toward the stove, or they're going toward the fireplace, extension cord, some dangerous place. And you look at the, and this happened to me, I look at the parent, just an eye contact, that please, if you don't get it, your child is going towards somewhere dangerous. And I know, what I appreciate is that they know what I mean with my eyes. I did not say a word, but they get it, and that's what they say. Ajaga, don't worry, Allah will protect them. This comment is hurtful in multiple levels. Number one is that you believe in God and somehow, God forbid, I don't believe that God is protecting. Second is that you unfortunately are careless, but you are putting me under stress. That you as a father, as a mother, somehow you dealt with this, this is not your first child, or somehow you came to this philosophy of life that you have to let things happen. Let the child fall, they will stand up again. Again, the child said, let it fall means, again, if they're walking, they're going to fall. That's fine. Don't baby-proof everything. Don't start hitting the ground as they're falling, bad ground or bad floor. Don't do that. But if they're going toward the fireplace, please, their child, especially if they're infant, they don't know. So it's important not to ignore this. And unfortunately, we have examples, and we have, if you look at the statistic and data that per year how many children are dying from, unfortunately, the negligence of their parents. From a child who died because of there was some form of weapon in the house and the child used it and they hurt themselves or others. There are cases, especially in America, to the cases that children fell or something fell on children from TVs who were not secured, who fell on the children. These are examples. So we cannot ignore it. Number one, it is important as a parent to take care of the tarbiyah, is to upbringing them, raising them, taking care of them physically. Physically, you have to take care of them. Don't let them just walk around bumping their head wherever they find. If they're riding a bike, don't let them go with a helmet. These are things that we teach them. Some again may argue, if you raise your child in such a protected and secured environment, they will not be tough. They're raised to be sensitive or overly sensitive. But the truth, again, going to that messy part and complicated, is that there is as I said, there is a boundary. There is an over protection, they call it helicopter parenting, that you don't even let your child walk. You don't let your child to do small things. I know examples of that. And there was I hope it was not real. Maybe they staged it. But they showed this child going for a bike ride with those assistant wheels on the side. And the parent literally bubble wrapped them all over. So their hands, their body, everything is a bubble wrap. So that is an excessive amount of protection. And then that you let the child, okay, go. There's a 10-kilometer away to your friend's house, your cousin's house. We don't know what's going to happen. You go. There's imbalance that is creating problem. Ifrat and tafrit are the jahil, Imam Ali alayhi salam said. A jahil, a ignorant, Imam Ali alayhi salam said, La ara al-jahila, mufritan kana aw mufarrata. You will not find an ignorant, a fool, unless they are excessively overdoing something or they are negligent. They're not doing even the bare minimum. Parenting that is wise is away from the excessive and from the negligence. Yes, I agree with you that sometimes parents overdo it, that it does not let children to learn the meaning of rejection. Your children have to learn eventually, not early, but eventually you have to learn the meaning of rejection. In life, everything is not a yes. It's okay to hear no. I know all these different new methods of psychology, and again, thanks to Instagram and some social media platform, people read a quote somewhere and said, oh, I know how to do parenting from now. You should not say no to your child. What do you mean? It's one opinion out there, but it's not even the prominent one. It's not the one that has the proper evidence behind it. Because you heard something does not make it the right thing. Don't be the all yes and all no. That's what life is. You don't say yes all the time. You don't say no all the time. And your child has to learn that. So that's point number 3. Which to keep in mind that we have to have multi-dimensional approach. Number 1, physical well-being of a child has to be protected. Do what's necessary, not overdoing it, what's necessary to protect your child physically. So if you have sharp corners and edges in your house, don't please leave it with the dua, please baby-proof it. Baby-proof it, it's not that complicated. Your child needs vaccination, needs doctor appointment. These are things, alhamdulillah, we don't have a lot of issues in our community, as long the close community, at least I don't think it's a big deal. But overall, because this is, hopefully the audience are some people who are outside the community, it's important to keep that in mind. We cannot ignore the physical health and well-being of a child. We are responsible toward that. The second one, the aspect of upbringing, it's the emotional tarbiyah. It's very important as a parent to make sure that the children understand the proper meaning of emotion. Sometimes we're scared of crying of a child. If they cry, we lose our control. You have to understand crying is a symptom, is a sign. So our responsibility is that, especially mothers learn this, and again some fathers as well, is that they even recognize what kind of a cry is this. Is it a cry of a pain? Is this the cry of just complaining? Is this the cry of asking for something, a tantrum? What is it? So emotions, it's something that we have to realize and understand is important for a child. One of those, again, when I say proper upbringing of a child, is one of those cliche things that we teach boys, for example. Boys or men don't cry. Which again, it's a very, very untrue statement from Islamic point of view. وَسِلَاحُهُ الْبُكَاء. Our greatest tool that we have before God are tears, are crying. A healthy soul is capable of crying. As we have in tradition, from the sign of qisawatul qalb, a heart that is hardened, a heart that lost its purity, is jumudul ayn, an eye that is incapable of crying. That's a sign of qisawatul qalb. So if your child is crying, don't stop their, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. Depends on why they're crying. So we have to learn about emotion. Inshallah, these are the topics we have to open as we go. Again, they're complicated. It's not just as soon as, if your child is crying and they're feeling alone and sad and all that, again, these are things that is different. Not every tear is the same. Not every emotion is the same. So we have to learn about tarbiyah, the emotional tarbiyah. To acknowledge their emotion and teach them that it's okay to express your emotion. It's important. You go to a house, parents wants to talk, children are happy. They see each other, they've been alone, they're laughing and having fun. Be quiet, be quiet. You be quiet, let them have fun. What's the point of you bringing them, oh, let's go to your uncle's house. Let them play. In our tarbiyah process, we do opposite of that. Everybody else has to accommodate parents or adults. In reality, they are not having that ability. Children, again, especially, we're referring to the 1 to 7. 1 to 7, that's the age bracket that Prophet ﷺ mentioned. That 1 to 7, your child is your amir. In other words, your child needs you to cater for them, not that they're catering for you. Who is the amir? The one in charge, right? Amir is the king. From 1 to 7, Prophet said, your child is your amir. Means if they ask for something, you cater. They need fun, they need imagination, they need playing. Let them. You take care of them, you protect them, you don't risk their life. But when they need that moment, you let them. 1 to 7 is not the time of discipline or teaching them. You should be quiet when we're talking. They're a child at that 1 to 7. But again, it's complicated. It's complicated. I'm not saying 1 to 7, let them sleep whenever they want to sleep. You know, let them watch no matter how much they want to watch on screen. There are limits. But when it comes to discipline, it's about what to do and not to do, right? Sit down and memorize this surah. You must memorize this surah. 1 to 7, you shouldn't do that. You cannot force a child to do namaz 1 to 7. They do it. They like it. They copy it. If they left, you're doing in the middle of namaz 1 to 7. They like to pray 2 rakat, 1 rakat with you. They're jumping around and then they leave. Let them. They say, oh, it's a namaz time. Don't do this. If you're sitting, you have to finish it. No, it's 1 to 7. Let them. It's not that age. So that's emotional tarbiyah, which is important. The third one is the social skills in the tarbiyah. And they learn a lot of social skills from us, from parents. I've noticed again, their pattern. If a father is the one that is very, what is referred to, introvert. They're keeping it to themselves. They don't speak as much. They're very quiet. Usually children tend to be like them. Because the first place you learn those skills are from the family. That's the first place. I've seen a lot of parents are so concerned about what language your children speak. Speak Farsi, speak Arabic, speak Urdu. That's fine. That's one thing about communication. But it's also very important to think about Farsi, Urdu, English, doesn't matter whatever language you speak. How do you speak to one another? How do you speak to your child? Social skills. An example of that, I highly encourage everyone to look at Hadith Kisa. Hadith Kisa, the tradition narrated from Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari, is a tradition narrated from Fatima al-Zahra salamullah alayha, which is about Kisa, a cloak. And the story is that Rasulullah one day comes to Fatima al-Zahra's house, to his daughter's house, and said, I'm a bit tired, I feel a bit weak, can I rest? Bring me a Yamani from Yemen, a cloak from Yemen, Kisa al-Yamani. So look at the language between them. I just love that as an example. How Rasulullah addressed his daughter. The word of endearment, the emotion, the love, and the social skills in it. And then the beauty of that is after. So after Rasulullah, Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam comes. These are, again, as you know, by the time Prophet was alive, Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein were children. They were not even teenagers yet. Children. But when Imam Hassan walks in, the way he addressed his wife, addressed his mother, and then addressed his grandfather is beautiful. He said, I feel the fragrance of my beloved grandfather. أشم رائحة جدي رسول الله. And interestingly, the same word is being used by Imam Hussein, similar word is being used by Hazrat Fatima. This family has that homogeneous way of expression. How they're even talking about Rasulullah. The fragrance of my grandfather. This is social skills. You learn from your mother, how your mother talks about your grandpa. And then when they walk in and how Prophet is talking to them. قُرَّةَ عَيْنِي وَثَمَرَةَ فُؤَادِي. The light of my eyes, the reason of my honor. In English, if you want to paraphrase it, I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of it. The light of my eyes is you're someone, I'm proud of you. And sometimes children are literally begging for this statement from their parents, to know that their parents are proud of them. So that's also a tarbiyah that we need to inshallah learn, which is the social skills in the tarbiyah. Inshallah, I'll leave the rest for the coming week. So the topic that inshallah we started is about tarbiyah, the upbringing, raising. Again, this is, I believe, is not just for children. We can also benefit. As a single person, we can benefit because we need tarbiyah as well. So if for whatever reason I do not have some elements of tarbiyah in my life, I can look for them on myself. So tarbiyah is not only in relationship with others, it could be a tarbiyah to nafs. We can, make sure we tame our character. We refine our personality. We can do it. And the points that I made, inshallah, is the three introductory point, and also the third point was to know that the tarbiyah, it's a multi-directional approach, a multi-dimensional approach. Rather than focusing on one thing, is focusing on multiple things. It's not impossible, but again, as I said, it requires effort. We need to look at their tarbiyah, physical and well-being of their health. We need to look after that, make sure to raise them with health and proper salamat. It's important to look at their emotional tarbiyah and the emotional well-being. The third one was the social skills and social well-being, which ultimately all these will help us to have a well-rounded person. Not just a person that is good at one thing, but God forbid is lacking in so many other aspects of their lives. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us tawfiq of first tarbiyatun nafs, to make sure we are refining our own character, working on the betterment of our akhlaq, betterment of our interaction with Allah, interaction, relationship with the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, especially with our family, inshaAllah. May Allah hasten the return of Imam of our time, Imam Sahib al-Asr al-Zaman. May Allah grant all those who are single ability, inshallah, to find a candidate and a spouse who is suitable, who is the right person for them. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all those who are ill and marid with healing, with inshallah quick relief and shifa, inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.